All right, everyone. So we are here to discuss matters related to digital divide and social cohesion, along with our theme today. And so I would like to start by having our distinguished panel introduce themselves to you. If we could maybe perhaps go in order and just describe your name and at a high level what you do.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Georgie Midgley from South Africa. I'm the CEO of a company called M4Jam. We are a tech platform that won WSA in 2021. And we essentially are a crowdsourcing platform that offers opportunities to marginalized and forgotten communities in South Africa. So we get funding from specific clients. So it could be government, it could be FMCG or beverage companies that want to understand what's going on in outlying areas, and we crowdsource labor in that area, we train them up, and we collect data and give tasks and working and earning opportunities to those individuals in those rural areas.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Rodrigo Assumpcao, and I'm the CEO of Dataprev, which is basically a very large IT company belonging fully to the Brazilian government, who runs all the social data, social security, social assistance, labor, and basically all the IT for the social policies of Brazil. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matias Rojas. I'm co-founder of Socialab. We are an open innovation platform that connects socio-environmental innovators and entrepreneurs with potential clients, businesses, or connections that make their businesses improve. I am working in what it's called right now impact corporate venturing, which is this connection, what we heard sometime in the previous panels. And I was winner on the 2020 WSA Awards.
Thank you. My name is Dorothy Gordon. I'm from Ghana. I've been working internationally in the area of, we could say, ICT for development, we could say tech for good, for more than 20 years. And one of the areas that I've been focusing on is policy, and the huge policy gap that we have between the declarations that we have at the level of the WSIS more than 20 years ago and what is being implemented on the ground, because we see even more inequity today than we did when we set out those goals.
Yeah, hi, Tom Calma, and from Australia. Here because we were a global winner in, with an app that we've developed on early education. It's a development index. But in 2020, we were also a global winner with another app with WSA on language capture. But I do many things, but generally referred to as a social justice and human rights advocate, and but particular support for Indigenous people and promoting Indigenous people, as I'm an Indigenous person from Australia.
Wonderful. And so just to start this off, very often, you know, when we bring these panels together, people may have top-of-mind burning agendas for things that they would like to share around the topic. I mean, should we suddenly fall off and start staring into space? I do have some things to maybe stimulate the discussion, although we find that we usually don't have too much of a problem with that here at WSA with all the great ideas we have. So, but I just wanted to start and keep it a little open and see if people had top-of-mind things they would like to share, issues, opportunities, solutions, things they're working on or that they've seen related to this area.
So from a social cohesion perspective, in South Africa, we have the second highest youth unemployment rate in the world at 51%. And as a result of this high unemployment, it's really created a lot of social cohesion issues. And three mainly come to mind. The first big one is xenophobia. So when there's such limited opportunity, Unfortunately, a lot of the smaller businesses in the rural areas, 85% are owned by Bangladeshis, Somalians, Ethiopians. So it's a very much well, the South African community feel that those opportunities have been taken from them. And it can create a lot of, there's a lot of unrest and violence at times. So from that perspective, it is very, very challenging. The second one is around the fact that because there's so few opportunities and South African businesses are encouraged to support local communities, instead of giving an opportunity that grows the entire community, they'll put out a tender for one big opportunity and one person will get it, leave that rural community, move to a city and buy themselves a big house and a Ferrari. And it doesn't really help the community itself. Essentially, you're just perpetuating the problem and making the gap bigger. And lastly, something that I spoke around yesterday in our panel was around the family unit. The family unit gets broken up. Everyone leaves those rural areas. You find when you walk into a rural area in South Africa, there's children, there's the elderly, and there's a lot of women. The men have left to look for work, and it's really breaking down the fabric of those communities because those family units aren't there to sustain, the way that things should be.
Okay, I'll take it up from there. I'm a bit worried that we haven't been talking about government here in this meeting enough. We still haven't invented anything better to distribute wealth and taxes, All due respect to all the investment and impact investors and all that, taxes do it and have been doing it in recent memory. And that's how you're going to deal with this huge inequality. We've got to tax those 26 people that Peter pointed out. And that is the way out for many things. And of course, people get resentful, and communications make people resentful, of course, for the whole political process. But we still haven't invented anything better. The only alternative to political process is war and bloodshed. So we're going to have to get our hands dirty and go to the other side. Considering the digital divide, I think we've improved this concept. I started working with tech exactly in this. It was then called digital inclusion, and we were all about, getting people connected. But nowadays, and especially with the pandemic, it was proven that it still is a connection issue in many places, but the quality issue is at least as big and much more prevalent. So we need to talk about quality connection. We need to talk about what to do with all of these things. And again, then the new thing comes along, which is data infrastructure. Because not only we're not managing to tax these 26 people and many others, but we're also allowing them to basically harvest all the world's data. And while we're talking about privacy, usually in the context of government access to data, private sector is just reaping everybody's data, putting it all together to feed business models and AIs, and we are content in clicking endless little pop-up screens that we don't read, we don't understand, and we're saying that we're empowering themselves and giving consent for something we can't really define. So this gets me very irritated, but I won't spoil Carlos' moderation right now. I'll wait a bit.
Thank you. What I would like to highlight, we've been listening to a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs that have specific solutions to specific problems. But what I am really, I don't know the correct word in English, but amazed for bad is our incapacity to understand the problems that we are facing as society right now. For example, when we talk about the gang violence, which is pretty present in Latin America, the answer is more prisons. So, okay, that should solve it. And we know it isn't possible to solve such a complex issue with a silver bullet. It isn't. There's no silver bullet. So what amazed me is the incapacity that we have to understand complexity as a whole. And just to give like a little small optimist light, when we talk to innovators and entrepreneurs, I see them as a human sensor network around the world where they are discovering these problems that they see, that they face, and in different infinite countries, cities, places, these people, these innovators are capturing this information. This is not working well, this is wrong, and they are developing solutions. So maybe we can deepen it a little further, but they are our IoT, these sensors around the world, human sensors that can capture the complexity of those issues and hopefully develop solutions, but not isolated, but integrated, like more holistic solutions. So just wanted to highlight that regarding social cohesion.
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent point. We're looking for holistic solutions, but we're working with very little information. You were saying that you have a sensor network, but our sensor networks are not aware enough of all the relevant data points that we need. And let me just check in the audience here. We know that there are many divides when it comes to digital. We know that women have less access than men. We know that the aged are on the wrong side of the divide. We know that people in rural areas are on the wrong side of the divide. And we know that people who don't have enough, let's say, a normal income, that they are below the poverty level or even at the poverty level, they don't have access in the same way. Can I ask you, if you know in your country, how many women don't have access to digital? How many of the poor don't have access? And what that means for them in their lives? We don't pay enough attention to these things. Getting the information is not easy. And therefore, as I was telling somebody this morning, these are not election issues. When we are going to vote, who has a platform, I am going to give better access to those people on the wrong side of the digital divide? Nobody is bothered enough at that very essential political level. And so I agree with you, Rodrigo. We must go back to government. It is very fundamental that we, how can I put it? We shed greater light on what these issues mean for the lives of the people. You imagine that government services have been put online. You need an ID card. You can't read. You don't know how to use a device. How are you going to get it? The person who helps me in my house had to pay her monthly salary as a bribe to get somebody to get her an ID card. That is a taxation we can't afford. So I really want us to think about digital divide and what it means for people's lives, and to think what you can do as a citizen to change that and make it better. Because right now, after the 20 years, we do not see clear metrics and clear reporting. Yes, 50% of women, or more than 50% of women globally, do not have proper access. There's theoretical access, but they don't have what we call meaningful access that will allow them to improve their incomes, allow them access to learning resources. They don't have it. And it has huge implications, not only for them, but our economies. So let me leave it there. I'm sure, Tom, you'll follow on.
Yeah, thank you. I think there are real challenges for older people to be able to get access to understanding the digital divide. When it comes to social cohesion, digital divide in Australia, you know, I wanted to cite a number of examples where I think there's been good practices. During COVID, and when we think that the First Peoples of Australia represent about 3% of the overall population, less than 1 million of us there, But during COVID and the lockdowns, the government was putting everybody into quarantine. You weren't allowed to, communicate with each other. What we found is that we needed to address, because Indigenous people, very oral, very much interactive, and all of a sudden we were locked up in our buildings. And so we really mobilised the youth to go and engage with the older parents and grandparents and get them onto understanding about how to use their smartphones properly and to communicate. The end result of all of that was we wrestled it away from government and took the initiative ourselves. But for our population, we only lost less than 250 of our total Indigenous population, which is probably one of the best in the world for that, which was much lower than the general population on a proportional basis, because of we were able to close that gap a little bit in that. The other example is, I mentioned the language app that we've developed, and it is where the communities are recording their languages on an app, which, there's a whole process around it. But what we've got, and again a digital divide, was older people who had better command of their languages, but the youth were the ones, younger people who could use the smartphones and other capture devices, are now working very closely together. We've recorded 19 languages so far. We've got another dozen on the boil, but that's been able to close a gap that is always, empowering youth, but also empowering older people to get a better understanding of the use of smartphones and greater capacity. No, it's not an election issue because we're very small. But the other really significant one is that we had a referendum in Australia last year, and there was a significant build-up to it. The referendum was to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the First Peoples, in our national constitution. Unfortunately, our 3% weren't the only ones that voted. The 97% of the rest of the population voted in the referendum. What we found during the whole process was the amount of misinformation and disinformation that was promoted around whether Indigenous people wanted to be recognised or not. The disinformation, a lot of it came from many of the conservative politicians and those who were opposed to it. We also found that there was a significant traffic of AI-generated responses, which were very misleading, and to develop that. So what we've developed, and I think this is an area that we need to look at more, and there was touched on a little bit yesterday, was around ethical behaviour and integrity in the use of digital material. And so there is an inquiry taking place in Australia, or about to take place, to try and look at different ways in which we can. Well, you can't make people to be more ethical. You can encourage them to do it, but my major concern is with politicians and just the misinformation that they're promoting. And it gets down to truth-telling, their opposition to understanding the truth of colonisation and the impact that that's had. There's the bit in the last session about the realities of what's fact and what's people's own beliefs about systems. So and that gets into the integrity side of it in truth-telling. But we can only develop as nations if we can really understand the truths of our histories and go through a reconciliation process for all of us who have been in colonised environments.
I just want to check with, did you know that we do have automated systems that help us with fact-checking that can be put in the hands of Indigenous communities who are facing that kind of attack in terms of deliberate misinformation? So I just wanted to say that because, yes, we look at big tech, but we do have some tools that we can use to fight back, even where big tech is not doing its, carrying out its role in terms of keeping a clean platform. Yeah.
And we also found that a lot of the blogs were coming from only a small number of people. A lot were generated from out of Texas and out of the borders of Russia that had been engaged by Australians to produce this misinformation.
Let me give another example of something that can be done with all. So Brazil is a technophiliac country, right? We love technology. Most people engage somehow. And the law says that the new government comes in and he has to provide an action plan for the next 4 years. And this action plan was traditionally done in government offices, whatever we thought was best and whatever we thought government had to do, whether it had some correlation with the campaign or not was optional, depending on who was in power. But we decided last year, the new government, to really use digital tools to open up participation. So we basically looked at what was around the world, and we found a very interesting piece of free and open source software being used successfully by the municipality of Barcelona called Decidim. And we basically applied very fast. We managed to reach over 5 million people. There were over 8,000 proposals that were then debated within the platform in many different regional meetings that presentially over 40,000 people took part. All this happened over 4 or 5 months. And then 75% of these proposals were seen to be absolutely reasonable and incorporated into the government's proposal of the planning law. And then it went to Congress, and then politics. Exactly, that is digital inclusion. And then, of course, the political process happened. So if anyone knows about laws and sausages, it's not a process you want to watch closely. But the participation, the political education, the development of awareness is also crucial, because beyond just understanding what is real and what is fake, even this concept is being challenged, you got to do something about it. And you got to choose where to invest your time, your resources in something that is going to produce some kind of worthwhile result. It's not just for the comfort of knowing that X is false and Y is truth, because the next day things might change as well. So this opening up of public participation is also one of the main applications of digital inclusion that we need to work with. The tools are there. The opening up of the political process is one of the elements.
So what happened to the black people? What happened to the women? What happened to the older people? What happened to the rural people in that consultation?
So the percentages of all the groups that you mentioned that took part in the consultation were higher than within society. Right? Of course, because this was purposefully done. There was an outreach work to reach exactly these groups. So this was part of government's intentionality to seek out these groups. And this, I'm not being politically correct or anything. No, this is the political base of the government who's in power. So it's exactly those people we want to bring in, and it's exactly those proposals that we want to bring in. This is also part of the political dispute.
So there's a number of sources of disinformation, yeah? So there may be campaigns, AI, various kinds of things. And we're all very familiar with the susceptibility of the public to be manipulated, particularly when they're made afraid of things. And, you know, when we look around how the world actually operates, we're already a tremendously socially cohesive species. However, on an emotional and psychological level, we're continuously activated to believe that there are enemies all around us trying to evade and attack us, which in some cases, is really happening. I don't want to discount people who are in warfare situations and so on. But at a social and cultural level, we've seen over and over in the US, we have developed quite a science of fracturing society around very narrow issues and distracting them from what unites them. The Nixon campaign did quite well with it. The Reagan folks took it to a high science, and now it's just solidified into a very strong kind of cultural polarization that media has, of course, exacerbated, and on and on and on. But this notion where people are afraid of each other, where there are enemies and all of that kind of thing is a very serious situation. So I'm encouraged when I hear these solutions that get people talking to each other, that increase the visibility of communities to themselves and each other. Because there's something, now granted anything can be botted or whatever, but the more people are talking to each other, the more, the less technology and fakery and manipulation and more centralized kind of control of thought, is happening. So a couple of things is I'm curious, from Tommy, you'd mentioned intergenerational interaction. And I'm curious if you have any insights or anything related to how you were successful in motivating the generations to engage with each other in that particular situation. There are, of course, many other forms of social intervisibility, but that's at least one I thought to pick up on.
Yeah, look, I think it was very encouraging. It was something that there was a bit of, I suppose, reluctance from some of the older people who weren't that familiar or that keen, but what was very encouraging was that the youth were keen to get involved and saw it as their role and duty to educate some of their older family members. And that was only the beginning of a process. We have to keep on investing in that process to keep it moving along. But we've got to make sure that, and this is part of the LD why we're here, is engagement of families and outside of a formal school system on how they can get more involved. Because there is, for an older parent or a grandparent who is now looking at an education system that is almost totally foreign to them, something now that's got a lot more technological based to it, we've got to help them develop the capacity to then work with their kids and the future. So it's not something that's just going to happen. We've got to invest in that, and that role rests with not only the formal systems but the informal systems as well.
What I can say to that is there's a whole industry around digital literacy, media information literacy, globally. And the European Union, for example, they have developed a whole set of resources. The Council of Europe, I know as well. I've looked at them. In India, they have whole sets of resources. What is the problem that we actually face with this? We find that there are a lot of frameworks, but if you look at how they roll out, an NGO would pick a bit of it, a private sector company would pick a bit of it, a government department working with older people will focus on older people, the education ministry will focus on younger people, and it's just a very confusing, incoherent kind of effort. And as I said, I work in policy. First of all, as I said, civilians, we have to take on our civic responsibility to make this an issue. But the next set of issues is really related to how governments work. You've got a budget, it's finite. You want to put your money where you can say, look what great things our money has done. You know, like in this effort Rodrigo described, the government can take it as a plus and tout it as an achievement. But when it comes to digital literacy, they can't tout any achievements because everybody is working in this uncoordinated way and government budget is siphoned in little bits and they don't have a framework for the monitoring and assessment. They haven't even defined what success would look like. So if you haven't defined and said, okay, for this year, if we manage to bring 20% more rural communities online with the correct kind of digital literacy training, you know, you have nothing to report. You just say, oh, we went to this village, we went to this village, we went to this village, we had 20 people here, 30 people. They're not able to sell it well. And then they don't get enough budget for it. It will be subsumed under the general budget of a ministry. It isn't something that is a deliberate kind of focus for governments. That's what we're finding globally. So a lot of resources out there. The resources inevitably become dated because the technology is shifting. The resources have to be different for age groups because what the adolescent is doing online is not the same as what an adult is doing online. But we are not being serious about it. And so this is my call to action, that wherever you are, whichever country you live in, please look at these issues because they are affecting our digital future. We cannot pressure people to be ethically correct when it comes to digital if we don't have everybody on board and we don't have a common understanding of the issue. I don't know if you agree with me. You?
Yes, I believe that there's so much diversity when you talk about gender, about age, about different geographic distribution. I agree in the sense that we should have this overview, but when we talk about complexity, because you said there's different understandings, there are different timings. We've worked with super university guys, and they do it very fast and achieve the lean startup and all this methodology. And then we work with indigenous communities, protecting the Andean cat, for example, which is a felon here in Chile. And they take like 3 weeks to take a decision. So when this government official says, do you want the funding to build this or you don't? They say, wait, when? 3 weeks. And this guy goes crazy because he has to return with his KPIs. This is how his work is measured. So my main takeaway is that we have to embrace diversity and complexity, and overall how to work with that is distributed networks. When we distribute power, where we distribute power of decision, I mean, power, economic power, it's impossible to control like a big brother from wherever you go, national government, local government, whatever. We should try to promote distribution of power, money, and every sense of power we have. So results are on themselves measured on their context, because someone will say they took 3 weeks to decide if the social space will be red or will be green. And when this guy goes to government, he's not doing his work, but not because of him, because the reality is different. So what I believe is that we should promote these distributed networks of power. I do it from the social innovators and social entrepreneurs point of view, but we should do it from governments, we should do it from NGOs, or because otherwise we are living in a dream that we can control, we can measure, we can have impact from our Olympus with a super aim, and that's not true. So distributed networks to get for complexity.
I think they
So,
used to call that revolution.
Yeah, that's one of the back pocket discussions, is at what point we need a revolution. From this Mount Olympus perspective here, you know, we bring up these topics around quality and relevance, you know, down on the ground, and you know, sure, we may get broadband penetration programs going in certain areas, but then programs get underutilized and all of this kind of thing. Are things a right fit? So it seems like there's a lot around data visibility and understanding how things are going to actually be relevant to people on the ground. And I know when we were talking earlier, Georgie, we were speaking a little bit about this, and I'm wondering if you or others have insight or thoughts to share related to, you know, diagnosing closer to the ground situations to know that you're really going to have specific micro needs to serve to that can be activated, that can then be aligned to these shared goals, that a bunch of these cobbled together partnerships can actually align to.
I think it's very aligned to what we've been discussing now. And, you know, the fact that, especially in South Africa, connectivity suddenly arrives in an area and they expect change. It's similar to what Osama was talking about yesterday. And just because it's there doesn't mean that the change happens. And you actually need to get that community together and get them to understand what does it mean to have, you know, that connectivity in your hand. And like we've been saying here, it's the marginalized communities that you can have a phone. It doesn't mean it means anything in your world. Nothing's going to change in your world. You've got to get individuals to understand, get them trained up. We've spoken about, you know, the fact that this device can unlock so many opportunities for you, but if you are not taught how to do that, it's one thing. But where we find in South Africa is the lack of trust. I mean, most of South Africans still leave their money in their mattress. If you get paid, you see the queues on payday and everything goes into your mattress. There's no trust for the banking system. There's no trust for the telcos. They feel that they steal their money as you recharge with airtime. It's all stolen. There's absolutely no trust in anything. So why would they trust technology? We're still buying airtime where they print out a little slip, and because people don't even want to do virtual airtime where you can send airtime to your phone. So getting people to trust, for us, is probably the hardest thing. So yes, there can be digital literacy programs, but getting people to actually trust that they need that solution and how it's going to help them is where our biggest challenge is.